Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be on equality. I want to explain how equality is an illusion and how there's multiple levels of equality, and I want to break them each down and show why they don't really make sense for the real world. The first level of equality is the concept that we should have equality under the law. It's a very fundamental concept of equality. Most libertarians, most people who are pro-equality on some level are pro-equality of at least under the law, that we're all equal under the law. Now, I'll explain why that actually isn't the case in our society. And it's a very easy example to give to break it down. The first example would be that women and children are actually treated differently under the law within our society. If you think about it, when a child goes to court, we give them special treatment because they are a child. Now, if we had true equality, a child would be treated like an adult. But we understand that there's a special case that needs to be considered, that they are a child. They might not know what they have done. They might not have full understanding. So therefore, we treat them slightly differently than we would treat an adult. Same applies to women. We give special rights to women, special freedoms to women. For example, the ability to decide for themselves about their own body, the freedom of pro-choice. Now, if it was true equality, both parents, the man and the woman, would have to make the decision about whether or not to terminate the pregnancy. But under our society, under our rules, that isn't the case. And the women have full choice about whether or not to terminate the pregnancy. And that is inequality, but it's sensible. It makes sense because it is the woman's body. So that's how equality doesn't really even work, even under the law. We actually have to have special rules for different groups within our society. And that's why it will never work, even under the law. Because we do need those special rules for special cases. So that's the fundamental. That's the most basic version of equality that most people will promote. The second level is the equality of opportunity. That everybody in our society should have equal access to being successful. Well, actually, this is fundamentally flawed as well. If you think about it, if you're a parent, I have 2 children, and every month I put aside money for them so that when they go to school, eventually, hopefully they'll go to university, they'll have money set aside for them. That there'll be money that they can have so that they don't have to worry about the costs of going to university. They don't have to have a huge student loan that will burden them throughout their life afterward. And this is unequal. Because if there's children that go to school, go to university, that do not have that savings that their parents put aside for them, then they're disadvantaged, uneven playing field in terms of that university experience. Because either they'll have to take out student loans, or they might have to work extra jobs, do something in order to pay for that cost. So there's an unfair advantage that I've given my children by putting that money aside. It's not the child that has made that determination. But it's the opportunities that I've provided to them that have given them that maybe one would say unfair advantage. But I think that shows good parenting, and that's a good thing to give your children inequality, that they basically are given an advantage. And society should promote that. Inequality is actually a good thing, because if we promote the idea that, hey, we're not all equal, we're not all going to have the equal opportunities, then we will put aside money for our children. We will do things that will give our future generations an advantage. And that's, to me, just basic good parenting. And that's reality. So equality of opportunity doesn't make sense. Now, the next version of equality is the equality of genders, men and women. Now, it's one of those things that they really, really push in society, that men and women are equal. And if you listen to sort of the feminists in the world, they will say that not only are they equal, but they're almost the same. They're basically the same. Just penis and vagina. That's the only difference. Everything else is basically the same. Their brains are the same. Everything's the same. Now, science has really proven that to be false. Men and women are not the same. And therefore, to treat them the same, treat them as equal, is actually doing them a disservice. For example, if you look at STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, they are predominantly dominated by men. And this is because men and women are different. We have different interests. Men are interested in things. Women are interested in people and having that connection with others. And if you look at those interests and how they play out in terms of the choices that people make, you'll find that women will choose jobs that cater to their interest. They'll choose jobs in humanities, in biology where it's related to people. They'll choose jobs that cater to their natural interests. Men do the same thing. Men will generally do fields that are much more orientated, like engineering, physics, math. Now, that doesn't mean that all women and all men will choose that way. But if you look at societies that are more and more free in terms of the choices that people are allowed to make, you will find that there will be a greater disparity amongst who actually goes into those fields. So you'll see things like computer science being dominated by men, and you'll see things like teaching being dominated by women, or nursing. Also, men tend to be much more driven by testosterone, which gives them a natural competitive edge, and that they are much more competitive in nature. So what will happen is men will generally go into things where there's much more of a competitive space. Also, men will make different decisions when they are working within a company. Now, if we try to force equality upon these situations, what we're doing is we're actually doing a disservice to people. Let's say if we say, there should be 50-50 women and men in STEM fields. Well, that's going against the very nature that women prefer not to go into STEM, and men do prefer to go into STEM. So you're basically saying, well, less men should be in there, which is unfair to the men that do want to be in there. And it's unfair to the women because they don't want to be in there in the first place, and you're trying to force them into a role that they are not interested in. So equality should not be imposed upon people, even when it comes to gender. The next concept is the equality of race. And this is another very controversial one where we say, all races are equal. And that is just not factual in any particular way. If you look at sports, they're dominated by certain ethnic groups. And the reason I say ethnic groups is you'll actually see a disparity between East Africans and West Africans. East Africans are very good at marathon running, whereas West Africans are very good at the sprint. And there's a reason for that. There's actually a genetic difference between those two ethnic groups. So you'll find that there's disparities amongst the races. They do perform differently. If you look at the 100-meter dash, it's a very good example of the superiority. And I'm not being racist in saying this. There's a superiority in the black genes for short distance running. They have quicker twitch muscles. They have straighter legs, which allow them to run faster. They have different bone structure that allows them to be better runners. And if you look at the differences between black runners and white runners, you'll notice that it might not be that there's a huge difference. But when you're running at the Olympic level, those small differences make enough of a difference that somebody who is genetically one way compared to another will just not be able to compete. Doesn't matter how hard you try. If you're a white runner, you'll never make it to the Olympics. Because there's a disadvantage to being white, genetically speaking, compared to black in terms of their natural ability to run. And the same goes for other fields where they say that swimming is predominantly dominated by white because our bodies are better orientated towards swimming. They say that black people are natural sinkers in terms of the way that their body is structured. Their bone density is a little heavier. They're more likely to sink than float. So it's a disadvantage to be black in terms of swimming. So each race has their advantages and disadvantages. And that's important to understand, because if we say, hey, everybody's equal, then it should be the case that each race is equally represented within these Olympic sports or within whatever in terms of athletics. But that isn't the case because people are different. And we should recognize these differences and understand them so that we can take advantage of them. The same applies with IQ, and this is the most controversial topic of all, where people are very paranoid to say that there's a difference in the IQs of the different races and the different ethnicities. But it's been proven time and time again, and study after study, that there are differences in IQ. Whether you like it or not, it's something we have to accept. And if we try to say, hey, all races are equal, and we should treat them all the same, you're doing an injustice to the people who you're trying to help. Because if they have differences, then you should understand those differences so you can better help those people. But if you try to treat them all the same, then you're basically trying to fit a square peg into a round slot. You're trying to ignore the fact that the people are different and try to treat them the same. And that's the biggest problem with equality, that it's about treating people the same even though they're naturally fundamentally different. And this is why equality is such a bad idea. And it's so against the actual fundamental rules of nature. And it's one of those things we really have to understand and appreciate in order to combat, because we all want to be good to each other. And there's nothing wrong with being good to each other. We have to be good to each other. But it doesn't mean that we have to treat each other as equals. And we don't have to see equality as being something that has to be part of our society. Inequality can work just as well as equality can, if not better, because it realizes the natural differences in people. Now I'm going to talk about one last version of equality, and this is to me the most dangerous version of equality, and that's the equality of outcome. Equality of outcome is the concept that when you look at the result, for example, women in STEM, that it has to be 50% women, 50% men. That's equality of outcome. It ignores everything else and just focuses on the outcome. And they do this all the time with different fields where they say, majority of company owners are men. Majority of CEOs are men. And they say, that's really, something's wrong with our society. It must be sexist. They blame sexism or racism or something rather than looking at what's really happening and saying, hey, maybe we're not equal. And that's why it's the result that we're getting. So that's, to me, the most fundamentally flawed version of equality, that they try to force equality of outcome. And it's really unfair that we try to cater to that version of equality. So this has been Socially Triggered. I hope that I've shed some light on equality and the fallacy of it and the illusion of it. I'd like to hear your feedback, and I want to be open to debate. And if you have any things that you want to share where you think equality is the best solution, then tell me. I'd like to hear it. I'd like to hear the debate. And I'm always willing to respond. So please comment, like, and subscribe. And see you in the next video. Bye.